Honored to be here this evening. This is Goa. Who would ever refuse coming on a trip to Goa? The land of harmony, the land by the ocean with the mountains on one side. This is really the idyllic land. And this is also the area that I spent a lot of my initial years working in the Western Ghats. And that's the story that I want to tell all of you. First of all, I must extend a very, very hearty thank you to the organizers of this event, the Directorate of Arts and Culture, for having invited me here this evening. Mr. Prasad Lolekar-ji, after much communication, and me, of course, being in faraway places was very difficult to get to. So my apologies for being a little difficult on emails, but I'm here, and I'm very, very honored to be here. I'd like to thank the Chief Minister as well for sending the letter to invite me here for this evening, and to a very dear friend, Mr. Mac Vaz, for inviting me and getting me to come here after many years to coming here to Goa. So thank you all for having me here this evening. I'd like to tell you about my journey into India's mountains of life. Mountains of Life really is not just about a very Western, what shall I say, idealism. When we talk about mountains, it's usually about how we conquer mountains. But that's not what mountains are. To me, mountains are full of life. And mountains support every one of us here. And that's what I want to talk about. Because mountains are the origin of rivers, and without the water supplied from these mountains, none of us would be in existence, and this land would not be as rich as it is. As a matter of fact, India would probably not have even been discovered if it wasn't for the Western Ghat mountain range. With its idyllic temperatures, the incredible monsoon, and all the other factors leading to a very rich and luxuriant growth of life, the plants that evolved here is what attracted the Westerners to come here in the first place. The peppers, the cardamoms, the spices, that's what this area was about. And that's all found right here in these mountains. So, how did I get into these mountains? When I first started as a young boy, it was images in National Geographic, in the books and magazines and in documentaries by the BBC. That is what got me motivated. Even at a time that I could not read, I was fascinated by images. Because images transcend boundaries imposed by culture, imposed by society. So when they transcend the boundaries, you don't really need to read the letters. You can understand the image, even as a young mind. And many of you here are bombarded with images every day. And with images, the saying goes that a picture is worth 1,000 words, if not 1,000,000. And when you can use pictures effectively, you can bring about change. And that's a lesson I learned much, much later in life. When I learned to read, I started reading books by Jim Corbett, Kenneth Anderson, and all these Shikar books. And those books fascinated my mind, and that's when I started to become a storyteller. Because I read stories by these incredible authors. And how many of you have heard about Jim Corbett? How many of you have read Jim Corbett books? Yeah? Many sleepless nights were spent reading books by him. If many of you I saw had not raised your hands, if you haven't, please get your hands on one of their books tomorrow. You will be fascinated. You will get into the spirit of reading like you've never done before. Because these are stories of adventure. These are stories that will captivate you night after night. So after reading these books, I decided that I wanted to live the life of Jim Corbett. But of course, we didn't have any man-eating tigers anymore. But yet, on a full moon night, not too unlike tonight, actually, or a few days ago, I started to go out into the wilderness all by myself or sometimes accompanied by a friend, and started to do what these British hunters did. Sit on trees on a full moon night and shoot down their quarry. Except I didn't have a rifle, I had a camera. And with the camera in hand and with a mind full of imagination, I started to go to places close to Bangalore. There's a place called Bannerghatta National Park, hardly 30 kilometers away, somewhere that we could go to easily. So we cycled there and then trekked through the forest and had found one water hole which we knew would be beautiful in the full moonlight. And we went and we sat up on a tree, and this is the kind of noises you start hearing. This is the chorus of dusk, night jars calling. I was sitting on a tree, and I realized how painful it is after 1 hour to sit on a tree. They didn't say that in the books. Then we started hearing all these funny things in the background, and saying, okay, and after about 2 hours I decided, okay, this tree is not for me. I decided to get down the tree to go and relieve myself. And that sound kept getting louder and louder. And suddenly, I was like, what is that sound? And then I realized, it's the sawing call of a leopard that Jim Corbett and Kenneth Anderson so strongly wrote about. The words, the sawing call, finally made sense in my mind as the tube light turned on. And I rushed back up the tree and I told my friend, Karthik, who's the founder of Wildlife SOS right now. I said, Karthik, that's a leopard sawing. And he's like, oh yes, that's right. And we're both like shocked that there's a leopard so close to us. And half an hour later, out of the darkness, emerges this incredibly beautiful leopard into the moonlight directly below our feet. We could see a leopard walking. Can you imagine that? I was hooked. That was the moment when I decided that I would dedicate my life to living a life in the wild and documenting animals like leopards and tigers, because they are beautiful creatures. They fascinate us. They scare us, but they awe us. Have you ever asked a kid why they love dinosaurs? Yeah? They're big, they're scary, and they're extinct. Well, so similar to dinosaurs, these animals are big and they're scary, and luckily they're not extinct. And it should be the duty of everybody here tonight and the world over to protect these animals till our last breath. And I do that by making documentaries, by educating people out here, and being a voice to the natural world. That's my job as a National Geographic storyteller and filmmaker. That was just the beginning of the story. Once I was fascinated with these cats, I decided to wander the wilderness, go up high into the mountains, the Western Ghats. It's a land which is so full of life that many of you would be amazed to see the richness and diversity of this mountain range. And in those shadows and in those mountain peaks was a land which was so exquisite, it hid worlds that none of us, we're still discovering even now. In the undergrowth are an amazing group of plant species, like for example the impatiens. And these flowers are found in the monsoon time. They emerge full of beautiful flowers. And there are species like the kurwa, which we just talked about, the strobilanthus, the kurunji, the Neela kurunji, as they call it in some places. This is a flower that flowers once in 12 years. The one here in Goa, I think it's about once in 8 years. There's another one that's once in 10 years. And this one from southern Western Ghats, the Neela kurunji, flowers once in 12 years. So why does it flower once in 12 years? There are things that we still don't know about the natural world. And that's what fascinates me. That's what students, being a student and being a researcher is all about, going and trying to find out about these things. And in the undergrowth are species like an ordinary looking ant. But does anybody know what this one is and what it's carrying?
Can anyone name this ant? This is a crazy cool ant. It's a huge ant. It's about 1 inch long. And what it's carrying is a grasshopper, which is, much larger, much heavier in size, probably 10 times heavier than the ant itself. And the ant is called a jumping ant because it actually springs up into the air and catches moths and grasshoppers in midair. So, my father's an entomologist, and so I first stole his magnifying glass. And with that magnifying glass, I could see the macro world under my feet. And there is so much new still being discovered even today. And the jumping ant is one of my favorite amongst all of the ant species. And cicadas that molt, that come out of the ground, they live in the ground all year, come out, molt, emerge, and if you go into the Western Ghats, you will hear them pretty much breaking your eardrums because they can produce a sound that's over 100 decibels, and if you're too close to a cicada, it can make you go deaf. So this is the natural world. I didn't have the cicada sound, so I didn't put it in my talk. And then there are, of course, a variety of birds that eat cicadas and other insects like the jewel beetle. And the Western Ghats is so full of vegetation. It's full of birds. Over 500 species of birds are found all along this mountain range. And I initially first became a bird watcher. I used to lead birding tours. I used to take people out to see birds because birds fascinated me because they're colorful, they're varied, and they're often difficult to see. But once you have a pair of binoculars, the world of the bird life just comes alive. So I started photographing birds, which were my very first challenging subjects. The Malabar trogon, probably one of the most beautiful birds in the Western Ghats. And high up in the canopy are other species, like black panthers, that live up there, that are very rare to see. And in this canopy world, there are other species like Nilgiri langurs, trying to get away from animals like the black panther. So it's a variety of things that captivated me. The primate species that are found nowhere else in the world. The Nilgiri langur, the lion-tailed macaque. These are endemic species. And endemic means that they are found nowhere else on the planet except in the Western Ghats. And I was so fortunate to be growing up in this landscape in a place where there were unique species around every corner. So I started going out looking for them. King cobras, green lizards like this calotes. And I found frogs to be my next favorite subject. Bush frogs, the size of a 1 rupee coin. Amazing creatures. And there are so many of these that I think now there's going to be another 90 bush frogs being described just now, very recently. So our frog count is going to go from some 200 to over 350 different species of frogs. As a matter of fact, the Western Ghats is one of the richest places for amphibians in the entire world. There are frogs that are tiny like these bush frogs, there are tree frogs, and then there are frogs like this, the burrowing frog. Can you imagine? I mean, that species looks like someone out of a science fiction movie like Star Wars, Jabba the Hutt, if you've seen Star Wars. The purple frog. And do you know that this was discovered in 2005? Hardly 10, 12 years ago is when this was discovered. Why? It's because it lives 50 weeks of the year underground. It never comes to the surface. Only in the heaviest monsoon rain is when it emerges, mates, and then disappears again for the next 50 weeks. So it stays out for only 2 weeks in a whole year. And so the species had just not been discovered by science. And when it was discovered, it became such a unique frog that they made a whole new family of frogs based on this guy, Nasica batrachidae. Its own genus, its own family, and its single species in the entire family. That's how unique this frog is. So I won't go into the statistics. Now you see that this is a male and that's a female. The male is less than half the size of a female. And there's other species. tiny, nondescript, but check out its behavior. See that little Karate Kid kick? Now this is called the foot flagging frog. And what it does is it signals with its foot. Now those are the myriad different types of stories that all of us are living here, right here, and these are stories happening in the Western Ghats every day. And I spend my life, and I spend my life right now, documenting these nuances, these little facets of life, to bring to all of you and make you understand and believe that all of this is worth saving. Because all of this we just can't simply let go of. And all of this life is dependent on one thing: water. The Western Ghats, the reason why you have all of these species in the Western Ghats is because of water. You have 10 meters of rain, 30 feet of rainfall falling here on average every year. And that, of course, is being affected by climate change. Year on year, there's less and less rain falling in many places. And with this kind of rainfall, you have this kind of diversity. And with this kind of diversity, it's something that all of us can be proud of. And that's what I document. And all of these species depend on rain. And I did a book a few years ago with ATRI and Gorgas Science Foundation, the two NGOs that I worked with in the past. And it was a book celebrating all of this life. And I mentioned earlier that I didn't realize the power of an image until much later. And with the culmination of this book project in 2004, 2005, that's when I realized how important photography can be to help conservation. So the book was launched by Abdul Kalam ji and Manmohan Singh ji back then in 2005 with the Environment Minister, Mr. Jairam Ramesh. And at that point, the Prime Minister asked us, the title of the book is India's Western Ghats, A Vanishing Heritage. And he asked us, now how can we prevent this heritage from vanishing? Now even to get someone like that to even ask that question is a first step towards achieving something concrete. Now, the only way that we could get to him, of course, is through the publication of a book like this. And even the reason why the book came about is because Mr. Nandan Nilekani, who I saw was a speaker here a few years ago, he was the one who asked Dr. Bawa, my co-author, he said, okay, you're talking about the Western Ghats, you've got thousands of research papers, but what is the Western Ghats? So Dr. Bawa looked around and he could not answer that question. So my job was to become a communicator by taking in all of that research material, condensing it into a form that's readable by the popular audience, by the general audience, and make them understand and appreciate the beauty of the mountains. And that's what we did in the book. And the book is what got us into the high-level offices. And with that, we got support in many ways from the government to help establish certain corridors and things like that in the southern Western Ghats. And much later, almost 3, 4, 5 years later, the book and the documentaries that I did subsequently were then used by the Wildlife Institute of India along with ATRI and presented to the UNESCO, the World Heritage Site team. And in 2012, 39 sites across the Western Ghats were declared as a World Heritage Site. And that that's when I realized the power of the image, what your images can do to help further conservation. But that's also the work that you need to do to package that image in a way that makes it friendly, makes it readable, engages the audience, and then you can really just take the power of the image and push it to the next level. And with that, meeting with Ajay Saxena ji this morning, I was presented this book, The Biodiversity of Goa, and I believe that a few sites in Goa are going to soon receive the World Heritage Tag. So congratulations for that. And thank you for the book. So books, images, documentaries all have a certain power, and that's the power that I started to understand. And what I also realized in my journey is that there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of conflict when it comes to water. This is an image from Talakaveri, the birthplace of the river Kaveri. So a few months ago, all of you may have heard about the riots in Bangalore, in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, and all about water. All about the rights of farmers and people who want to drink water, and who controls all of this water. I also just found out that Goa and Karnataka are also having a big fight over the Mandovi, the Mahadevi River. For the last 30 years, this fight has been going on. Because from the birthplace, all across the floodplains, the landscape, all the way up to Tamil Nadu, where the Kaveri empties out, an 800-kilometer journey, the rivers are being used by everybody for everything from agriculture, for drinking, for industries. Everybody needs water, everybody uses water, and it's one of those things that we take completely for granted. And when we take something for granted, that's when we start disrespecting it. And that's the one thing that we cannot disrespect is water. We use it for washing, for sports, and everything that you can think of. And we use water in a way that's very holy. But even in these holy places, we also start littering these rivers because we love them so much. As a matter of fact, I read many articles called Loving Rivers to Death. And that's what some parts of spirituality, where rivers initially were protected in the birthplaces because they didn't want anyone else destroying it. So they were made into temples. And those temples protected the birthplaces of these rivers. But now those very birthplaces are being affected by too much love. But the good part is, I think people can understand that these are places that have to be protected for eternity, because these are the birthplaces of rivers. And one other point I want to make here is that when these riots happened, when these big bunds happened all across, there were estimated to be losses of over 25,000 crores per day when a band happened in Bangalore or Chennai. Can you imagine if that money had just gone into helping protect these rivers, how much you would save? If you can just help protect these rivers, then we wouldn't have to be fighting over water. We would be giving back protection. And all that these places need is protection in the headwaters for eternity. Because if we don't protect the headwaters, we're shooting ourselves in our own foot. Actually, we're shooting ourselves in our own head if we don't protect the headwaters. And instead of fighting over it and losing thousands of crores of money, of revenue, that same money and revenue can be utilized in a positive way to have a future and a positive impact on the environment. And that's what I would rather push towards, rather than putting this kind of pressure on these same rivers. So rivers of spirituality, we made a short film about that. And we talked about why pollution and how pollution can have such a detrimental impact on the environment.